Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the Minister first on the very reasonable tone at which she's been advocating this bill, and on the Secretary of State's speech earlier. As he said, this is not a battle in a culture war, this bill. It's not an ideological effort. It's simply an attempt to defend what is already legal in this country. And I don't want to aggravate the culture war, which, as my right honourable friend says, we certainly are in. But the fact is there really is a battle of ideas going on in our universities at the moment. And if we are to prevent the exacerbation of the culture war, we need this bill. And ideally we need this bill to be strengthened. Now, members opposite are right in pointing out that there are very few overt instances of censorship. But nevertheless, academic freedom is under sustained intellectual attack in our universities. And the battle of ideas that we are in is not in the traditional sense of a clash of opinions, the normal free exchange of ideas that universities are all about. It's much more fundamental. It's a battle between, on the one hand, the very idea of the free exchange of opinions, and on the other, the opinion of the radical left, going back to Marx, the idea that the notion of a free exchange of opinions is itself oppressive. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't think many members opposite are radical Marxists, but in opposing this bill, they are empowering radicals. And I want to do justice to them, to those radicals, to the other side. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I hope you'll indulge some student philosophising briefly. The radical left seems to have two strong beliefs. They believe, first, that identity is psychological, that a person's true essence, their very self, is constructed by themselves or by other people. And this explains the extreme sensitivity around people's feelings, because if the self is a psychological construct, if your identity is basically how you feel, then being hurt or offended is absolutely catastrophic. An insult is a form of violence. It's almost worse than violence. And the second belief of the radical left is that people can and do suffer what is called false consciousness, that they can believe ideas which aren't true and which are in fact harmful to their own interests. And these ideas are also known as conservative opinions, such as belief in the Western political and economic model, or in Brexit, or in the Conservative Party. Now, this explains why the radical left doesn't have a problem with censorship, why indeed they think that censorship is actually necessary for freedom, to suppress false consciousness and allow people to discover their real selves rather than the conservative self that the ruling class has imposed on them. Happy to give way.
And that is precisely why, of course, the word heretical is apposite, because views that don't conform to the orthodoxies described in a quasi-religious way are regarded as heresy. And once they're defined as such, almost anything can be legitimised in putting them down.
Absolutely right, and he'll be delighted with what I'm about to quote someone he doesn't strongly agree with. Herbert Marcuse. No debate about universities and students would be complete without Marcuse. He was the great Marxist philosopher who basically wrote the script for the radical left. And in his essay called Repressive Tolerance, admirably well named, he argued for, and I quote, the withdrawal of tolerance of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, or which oppose the extension of public services, social security, medical care, etc. Moreover, he goes on, the restoration of freedom of thought, as he calls it, may necessitate new and rigid restrictions on teaching and practices in educational institutions. So that's what we are up against, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I don't accuse a single member opposite of believing this, but as I say, in opposing this bill, they are empowering those opinions, and we are in a very, very parlous state in our universities. So I welcome the bill. I welcome its strengthening of the duty for universities to protect free speech, the extension of this duty to student unions as well, for the right of academics to sue if they've been no platform, and the role of the new free speech champion at the Office for Students. All excellent provisions. I just to rebut what's been said opposite, the bill does not allow hate speech. Hate speech is illegal. It doesn't protect Holocaust denial. That's not protected speech. It does not. Under the ECHR, Holocaust denial is not protected speech. So if somebody is no platformed for Holocaust denial is no platform, they would have no right under this bill to sue or to challenge the university.
Well, my honourable friend,
Happy to give way.
thank my honourable friend. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the bill is there to deal with the issue of the culture of perpetual offence of being offended to the point of not being willing to listen or engage in constructive debate, and that this bill does allow for the promotion of freedom of difference of opinion so that you can come together and form new ideas, but you don't always have to agree with what the speaker is saying.
Very good. I absolutely do agree with her on that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll finish with just a few suggested improvements to the bill which we might consider in committee. Firstly, I think we should go further than insisting that all reasonably practical steps are taken to promote free speech. We should be saying that all necessary steps are taken, because there is a real danger in the current wording. For instance, of a university pretending that the cost of security, for instance, makes an event impracticable, which means that its opponents could effectively boycott it or ensure that it's withdrawn. Secondly, I think that we should broaden the protections for academics beyond their field of expertise, which just would beg the question about how do you define their field of expertise. What if a professor of European history were to criticise the Chinese government, for instance, or indeed criticise their own university for being too cosy with the Chinese government? We need to protect those academics too. And in your own field, as an academic, there's a very important consideration about control of the curriculum, what's the freedom, not so much the freedom of speech, but the freedom to teach. Who decides what academics should be teaching? I think we need to explore the concept of conscience rights for academics to resist a drift towards teaching that they would not accept, that they should be obliged to carry out. We need some protection of dissent in the system. As the Shadow Secretary of State mentioned, the current bill does not protect or insist that colleges at Oxbridge and at Durham should take the necessary steps to protect freedom of speech, just the universities and the student union. I think we should extend the obligation onto colleges as well. We should allow academics to appeal not just through the civil law but to an employment tribunal if their academic freedom is restricted. And lastly, I think we need to clarify the role of the Equality Act, which should not be used to close down an event on the grounds that someone says it would constitute harassment or discrimination, which is what happened. Have to give way, certainly.
He's just argued to extend the legislation into employment law. But is he aware that universities have tenure and that they're not actually covered by it? That's the reason why they've got protection in terms of their academics, which is nothing to do with employment law.
Yeah, for the right honourable gentleman for that intervention. The fact is that we're extending protections into universities, and all aspects of law should be covered, including those who are not covered by tenure, and not just the academics, also visiting speakers and students themselves. So let me lastly suggest that we need to clarify the role of the Equality Act. In Essex University, no platform to visiting academics who had gender-critical views on the grounds that the Equality Act meant that those visitors that event would constitute harassment or discrimination. That is quite wrong, and my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, gave another example of that earlier. So members opposite think that there is no problem with that this bill is unnecessary, that there is no real issue, no problem to address. I could not disagree more, and I agree with my right honourable friend. I don't think we've debated anything as important, except maybe the Brexit legislation, in the 18 months I've been in this House. To prevent a culture war, we need dissident views to have full expression. I give all credit to the Minister, also to Policy Exchange and to the Free Speech Union, and to campaigners outside this place who have campaigned for this law. It's very, very necessary, and I support it. Thank you.